I know that a lot of people filling out their NCAA tournament brackets are going to be afraid of Kentucky's volatility. But I'm here to tell you that the Wildcats are actually pretty likely to make a deep run in March Madness.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe. On today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be answering a listener question about Kentucky basketball and the Final Four. Also going to be taking a look at various bracketology predictions and going to be answering the question, what is Kentucky's best draw out of their region? Finally, on today's episode, we're going to be talking about Reed Sheppard and the Ringers' latest mock draft. They have Sheppard in a pretty lofty place. Thank you so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. Want to remind everyone out there that we are free and available on all platforms. Today's episode is brought to you by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Have you ever wondered what adventure could be around the next corner? Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. You can check them all out today at nissanusa.com. Before we dive into anything, I want to remind you guys here on Locked On Kentucky, whether you are listening on podcast or on YouTube, if you go to the description of the episodes, there will be a link to the Locked On UK ESPN Bracket Challenge. We're doing another pick'em this year already. I think 12 folks in the group. If you want to join up and see if you can win the bracket pool, would absolutely love to have you. I think we had like 50 people the last time we did this. So join up. It's free. It's going to be super awesome. It's open to anyone who wants to click that link again in the description of the episode on YouTube or on podcast. Thank you so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. Want to remind everyone out there that we are free and available on all platforms wherever you are tuned in. If you subscribed, it would be much appreciated. All right, so we have a listener question here that I thought was really interesting, especially considering where we are at in the season. Obviously, this is something that all of us have speculated over throughout the year, but I think it really does come to a head as we enter postseason play. This question comes from Anthony Glass 6365. He says, Lance, do you think this defense can sustain their play to make a Final Four run? And I'm going to kind of open up this question a little bit further and just ask the question, does Kentucky have what it takes to reach the Final Four? And my answer to that question, I think today, is yes. They have various things that I think can get them to the Final Four, and I think they're more likely to get there than you think. So before we dive into the defense, let's talk about some of the positives that we know about Kentucky basketball that will aid them in a possible deep tournament run. First things first, I think you have to look at the guard play. Obviously, Kentucky basketball has one of the best backcourts in the nation, and that's not just in the starting two, it's in the rotation as a whole. Rob Dillingham and Reed Sheppard coming off the bench are two top 5 NBA draft picks. No doubt we're going to talk about Sheppard and his draft status later on in the show. And then you've got, one of the SEC's best scorers in Antonio Reeves and one of the SEC's best, I think, lead guards in DJ Wagner. Obviously not been shooting the rock as not as confidently. He's still been shooting it confidently, but not as at as high of a rate as some of these other guys have been. But he's still out there making plays and still playing pretty good on defense as well. So as a whole, the quartet here of guards, you could say, I think is one of the best in the nation. And despite 3 of these pieces being freshmen, I think it still will help them make a deep run in the NCAA tournament. Now, obviously, the old adage is, well, you need veteran presences, you need guards that have experience, and I think Reeves fits that bill. But everybody else being so young, you may question whether or not Kentucky can really push for that run. And I think that their stats and their ability to outplay various veteran presences in their conference, I think really does speak to whether or not they can make that run. And I think the best example of that is against their most recent opponent, the Tennessee Volunteers, on the road against some really experienced guards, Santiago Vescovi, Zakai Ziegler, among others, and they were able, Sheppard, Dillingham, Reeves, Wagner, were able to put it on them, and were able to go and win that game on the road. So can Kentucky make a run with their guard play? Absolutely, even though most of their pieces are extremely young. The offense as a whole is excellent. You go and look at the KenPom ratings right now. Kentucky, number 6 in adjusted offensive efficiency. They shoot the ball well as a whole. They have the nation's leading three-point shooting offense, and they're also really, really good from the charity stripe as well. 77.4% is what they are shooting there at the foul line. So Kentucky as a whole, outside of their guard play, I think has the offense to make a run in the NCAA tournament. And once it gets hot, it's really, really hard to stop. You look at the 5 most recent games for the Wildcats, all victories for UK, and they have scored 117, 91, 111, 93, and 85 points, and they've been able to outscore all 5 of their opponents in those games. Blew the Alabama Crimson Tide, somebody that was a darling according to the net ratings, and according to most people still. They blew them out just a few games ago, and Alabama's kind of limped to an awkward end to their season. But Kentucky, I think, the guard play, the offense, absolutely has the ability to push UK to a Final Four run. But Anthony wants to know here about the defense. Can the defense that they're playing sustain their play to make a Final Four run? So if you are not aware, while Kentucky has been giving up a ton of points on the defensive end of the floor, which is really what matters at the end of the day, their pace of play alongside some of these other teams has allowed more possessions for these opponents to score. And while Kentucky's defense does not allow for statistically efficient basketball, I would say, I think that they've still been able to put up some serious point numbers because of the fact that they just get the ball more, because Kentucky plays with more pace. In turn, I think some of these opponents are playing with more pace if they weren't already, so on and so forth. Because if you look at Kentucky's conference-specific metrics, they have the 6th best defense in the SEC. They currently give up only less than 50% from inside the arc. They block 15.5% of opponent shots. They give up 33.6% from beyond the arc, which is a little bit above the national average, but still a pretty good number there as well. They grab offensive rebounds. The effective field goal percentage is nice. They don't allow a ton of assists. So overall, Kentucky's defense, if they played at a slower pace, would probably be somewhere between, I would say, 20 to 25 spots higher in the KenPom ratings, which as of right now, they have the 94th best defense in the country, according to that website. So Kentucky, I think, has room to grow on defense if they play slower games. Statistically, at least, I think you will see their metrics rise and you'll see their point per game totals for the opponent go down. I think you saw that in a game against Auburn earlier this year, just a few weeks back, where they were able to go into Neville Arena, play a slower-paced game, and they held the Auburn Tigers to just 59 points. I think that's what this team can do if they play a slower game. And if they run into a team that's just simply not shooting the basketball well, you're going to end up doing something like you did against Ole Miss earlier this year, where they just couldn't hit the broadside of the barn and couldn't hit 65 despite playing a pretty, I would say, average pace to slightly above average paced game. So I think Kentucky right now is playing good defense. Can it be sustained? I think the answer to that question is yes, for one single reason. One single reason. And it's Kentucky's ability to get up for some of these bigger games. We can go through the schedule again. Against LSU, on the road, after having beaten Ole Miss and Auburn, big time win on the Plains for Kentucky. Big quad one win. Kentucky then went and lost on a buzzer beater to LSU, 75-74, in a game that Kentucky could have run away with, I think. I think Kentucky's the better opponent, the better team. I think if they played that game again, Kentucky would win. And then Kentucky, after that, went on a 5-game winning streak. Had they not given up that tip-in, Kentucky would be SEC champions right now. Regular season title. They, I think, in some of these games against the Arkansas, the Vanderbilts, the Georgias, the Mississippi States of the world, Kentucky struggles to get up at home or on the road. But against the Alabamas, against the Tennessees, against the Auburns, against the Floridas, even though one of those games was a loss, Kentucky gets up. They know what they're dealing with. Against the North Carolinas, against the Kansases, way back in November and December, Kentucky gets up for the opponent. They play hard. they shoot well, they get out, and they compete. In an NCAA tournament environment, I think there's going to be one game that Kentucky may have this issue, just simply not getting up, and it's the first round against what will likely be a 14 or a 13 seed. If Kentucky gets past that first game, I think they have the ability to make a run with the way that they're playing defense right now. If they commit themselves mentally, I think this team can play really good defense. And if they get past that first game where it's just the 14 seed, it's just Morehead State, it's just Oakland, it's just X, Y, or Z team, if they can get past that game and really hone in a neutral site, Kentucky's got a chance to make a run. And where have we seen this recently, by the way? With the defensive efficiency ranked around the 90s, with a team that plays a first-round game against a tough opponent, but goes on to make a Final Four run anyway. Well, we've talked about this on the show before. We've seen this most recently with the Miami Hurricanes, who this year not going to make the NCAA tournament. They have actually lost, I believe, 9 games in a row after being 15-7. The team that Kentucky blew out of the water earlier this year. But last year, Miami ranked 99th in adjusted defensive efficiency. And they barely beat Drake 63-56 to begin their run. And then they beat Indiana, Houston, Texas, and then fought hard against UConn in the Final Four. Eventual national champion, UConn. Kentucky, in a similar boat. They get past this first opponent. I think Kentucky is more likely to go on a run because of the way that they commit themselves in these big-time games than a lot of people give them credit for. I think the offense, the guard play, and the experience that Kentucky has at that shooting guard spot with Reeves will allow them to at least have the chance to really tear up some brackets that don't believe in them. So what do you think? Does Kentucky have the ability to make that run with their defense? Or are they going to fall short in the first round or in the round of 32 and disappoint fans as they have for the past few years? You can leave all of that in the YouTube comments below or on the socials at Locked On UK if you're listening on podcast. Okay, we've got some bracketology updates. Speaking of some of these lower seeds, what is Kentucky going to be dealing with here in the bracketology? Most likely, what are they going to be dealing with? Because now we have a clear enough picture to know the types of teams or the specific teams Kentucky's going to be playing against. And then the question I want to answer on today's episode, what's the best draw from those seed lines that Kentucky could get? Before I dive into all of that, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Have you ever wondered what adventure could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. For instance, the 2024 Nissan Rogue, it is perfect for city drives and great escapes. The class-exclusive Google built-in is your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything. Gone are the days of connecting your phone. Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Play Store are built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. The 2024 Rogue is the perfect mid-size crossover for your next adventure. Nissan's incredible lineup also includes the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder, has room to fit up to 8, an expansive cargo capacity, and advanced available 4x4 capability. With 284 horsepower and up to 6,000 pounds towing, when adventure calls, the Pathfinder is there to answer. You can take the Nissan Rogue, Pathfinder, or Armada and go find your next big adventure. You can check all of those different vehicles out over at NissanUSA.com. Again, that is NissanUSA.com. All right, continuing along here on the Tuesday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. Again, if you have not gone to the description to add your bracket to our bracket pool over on ESPN.com, I would highly encourage you to do so. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's free. A lot of you are going to be using the app anyway. Why not go ahead and add your bracket to the pool here? I believe we've got about 12 people in there already. Let's see how many we can get. I would love to see a bunch of you in there competing for the Locked On UK bracket challenge title. I think it should be a lot of fun. Okay, so we talked about whether or not Kentucky has what it takes to reach the Final Four. We're now going to get into the bracketology, latest from ESPN, CBS, and then Bracket Matrix, which shows every single bracketology on the planet. Let's start here with ESPN. After that win against Tennessee, the Wildcats moved up to a 3 seed in Joe Lunardi's latest bracketology. 3 seed in the East region, playing against UConn, North Carolina, Kansas, other top seeds there, South Carolina as the 5 seed, and then Kentucky's opponent, automatic qualifier, Morehead State. And quite frankly, that is a team that I do not want to see in the first round. Unfortunately, that's probably going to be the team that Kentucky sees, if I'm just being completely honest with you. I would not like to see them or Toledo, but we'll dive into that in just a second. Other 3 seeds include Iowa State, Baylor, and Duke. If Kentucky wins the SEC tournament and somebody like Creighton or Arizona or Marquette falls flat in their respective conference tournaments, Kentucky could move up to the 2 seed line. The Blue Jays, Wildcats, and Golden Eagles are all 2 seeds right now. North Carolina is the other 2 seed right now, and they are currently projected to win the ACC tournament as an automatic qualifier. So we'll see how that ends up. 4 seeds right now include Alabama, Illinois, Auburn, and Kansas. If Kentucky loses their first game in the SEC tournament, I would be curious to see whether or not Kentucky falls to that 4 seed line. I think there's a pretty good chance they could, just based on other projections out there outside of ESPN. But I think that Kentucky right now, if they win at least one game against A&M or Ole Miss, then I think Kentucky should be fine on that 3 seed line with the chance, just a small chance to move up to that 2 seed line. That's what ESPN projects right now. CBS has Kentucky as a 4 seed, playing Vermont in the Midwest region. Purdue, Baylor, Creighton, the other top seeds in this bracket as well. Utah State at number 5. I'm not going to lie. If Baylor can beat Florida and Kentucky continues to advance, this may be the best draw for the Wildcats. May be the best draw for the Wildcats that I've seen, just on the whole. In a second here, we're going to pick and choose different teams we'd like to see. Watch Kentucky lose to one of them in hilarious fashion. But Purdue, probably the team Kentucky can hang with the most as far as offense against offense. That should be a fun game. Baylor, I don't necessarily know if I trust them with the way that they play defense. Curious to see what they do in the tournament. Utah State is a 5 seed, seems relatively weak compared to some of these other 5 seeds. And honestly, to be quite frank with you, a couple of these 6 seeds. But yeah, Kentucky as a 4 seed, and if you scroll down here, they are the second best 4 seed. Alabama the best 4 seed, according to Jerry Palm. And by the way, Kentucky has the best record, quad 1 record, among any of these 4 seeds here. Alabama 3-9. Illinois 5-6, BYU 6-7, Kentucky 6-5. So the only team with a winning record in the quad 1 in that 4 seed line, according to Jerry Palm. So, question I wanted to ask on today's episode: now that we have this information, with Kentucky as a 3 seed or a 4 seed, looking at bracket matrix, Kentucky has an average seed of 3.69, just to be specific here. Most outlets still say 4 seed, but some of the more important ones, ESPN most notably, say 3. Now that Kentucky's kind of sitting on this line, we will say 3 seed here. What's the best draw for Kentucky in the NCAA tournament? If they play a 14 seed, obviously, to open their round, in the round of 32, if they see a 6 or 11, what would be the best options there? And then the 2 seed, what would be the weakest 2 seed, in my mind, that Kentucky could see? And keep in mind, Kentucky could lose any of these games. I'm not saying any of these teams are bad. There's a reason they're in the NCAA tournament. I'm just saying, relative to some of the other opponents here On paper, these teams scare me less than the others. Kentucky could still lose the game, lose it by 40. They could still lose the game. The 14 seed that I would like to see compared to some of these other 14 seeds is Oakland. As of right now, Oakland is a projected 14 seed according to CBS and then as well as ESPN. Oakland, among these various 14 seeds, has the lowest offensive efficiency according to KenPom and the lowest net ranking. They also have 6 quad 3 losses on their resume. 7-6 in quad 3 games. I think Oakland would be the team that I would want to see the most. I'm looking for a team that isn't necessarily explosive on offense. Does not matter whether or not they are great on defense. Kentucky can still score. I'm looking for a team that, regardless of pace, is not particularly efficient. And there's going to be one caveat to that here as we continue along. Oakland, I think, would be my choice. So let's say Kentucky wins that game. What would be the best 6 or 11 seed Kentucky could face? If we're looking at a 6 seed, it's either San Diego State or Wisconsin. San Diego State is not what they were a couple of seasons ago. They started out the year 14-2. At one point, they were 18-5. They are now 22-9. A little bit of a slip here, 4-4 to end the season. And their defense, while pretty good, is not necessarily overtaking their offense here, which is 68th nationally and one of the worst in the nation in three-point shooting percentage. Jaden Lee, is really, really good. The forward that they have there, 6'9", 240-pound senior. He could give Kentucky problems. Lamont Butler is still here. Micah Parrish is still here. This is a pretty experienced team, but they're just not winning games. Sometimes their offense falls flat. You look at some of their losses. 66 points, 63, 58. Some of their more recent losses here. I don't know if I would trust San Diego State in that spot to really take it to Kentucky. I mean, they could. They very well could. Absolutely could. But if we're going on paper here, San Diego State would probably be my choice. If not, Wisconsin, who has played a very difficult schedule, but is at 19-12, has lost a ton of games in the regular season. They've won 3 Big Ten games since February 1st. They started out, by the way, 16-5, 8-2 in Big Ten play. I'm sorry, 16-4, 8-1. And they finished 19-12, 11-9 in Big 12 play, or Big Ten play. Their offense is okay. I think it's pretty good, but not elite. I mean, well, what am I kidding? It's borderline elite, but they're really, really slow, and their defense is awful at three-point defense and doesn't block a lot of shots. And as far as effective field goal percentage, I think Kentucky could score points on this team. Could, if they have a decent shooting day. The 11 seed, this was actually, funnily enough, this was more difficult than the 6 seed here. I'm going to be honest, guys. I think the 11 seed that I would want to see most is Pitino and St. John's. Because you look at some of these other options. Let's go through them real quick. Princeton, projected 11 seed, has a really, really good offense, 24-3 coming out of the Ivy League. Beat Arizona in I think last year's bracket, would not want to touch them. Drake, really good offense, won their conference tournament, wouldn't want to touch them. New Mexico has balance, good offense, and Jamal Mashburn's son, don't want to touch them. Colorado, I think number 5 in the nation in three-point shooting percentage, one of the best offenses in the Pac-12. They've won 6 straight games. Seton Hall, another projected 11 seed. They've got Shaheen Holloway, who, if you don't know, is the former head coach of St. Peter's. Need I say more? St. John's, statistically, is probably the weakest 11 seed that Kentucky could face. And honestly, would probably still make for a good matchup, would still make for a tough matchup. They have top 40 offensive and defensive efficiency. They grab offensive rebounds. They play with good pace, but they don't shoot particularly well. They rely on three-pointers a ton. They are one of the most experienced teams in the country. They're tall, but I just don't know if statistically, overall, there are different things that bother me about them. For instance, they don't prevent second chance points. They really struggle keeping opponents off the foul line. They are one of the nation's, or excuse me, not one of the worst 3-point defenses in the nation, but just one of the worst. They're in the bottom third there. Their effective field goal percentage is not necessarily where I would like it to be for a team that could upset somebody like Kentucky with how good their offense is. Just looking at these on paper, by the way, we can dive into matchups whenever these things actually happen. But St. John's would probably be my 11 seed. Because, again, Princeton, Drake, New Mexico, Seton Hall, Colorado all have things about them that would scare me, I think, a little bit more than some of the problems that St. John's has. And St. John's, by the way, has won like 5 straight games. We'll see how they do in their conference tournament. But still, would probably rather face them. If I had to pick another school, it's probably Seton Hall. And that's my caveat here, is statistically, Seton Hall does not have a good offense. They don't have a great offense. But what they do have is Shaheen Holloway. Just go ahead and pull up Seton Hall's numbers here for you guys. Yeah, they're top 20 in offensive rebound percentage, but they can't hit threes. They turn the ball over. They get blocked. They get stolen. They don't shoot well from inside the arc. They're below average there. They're not extremely tall. They're experienced, but they play a really short rotation, and they don't get to the foul line that well. I don't know. I don't know about them. And then the final thing I want to talk about here. So we talked about 14, 6, 11 seeds, and then 2 seeds. Baylor, I think, right now would be my choice. Baylor would be my choice. Top 5 offense. Sure. Whatever. Okay? Cool. But they currently have the 12th best defense in the Big 12. It's not a good defense. Relative to conference standards, it is not good. They're not great at defending the three-point shot. They're really bad at defending the rim. They don't turn opponents over a ton. They don't prevent offensive rebounds a ton. They don't prevent the foul line. They don't prevent opponents passing the ball around. They don't prevent assists. They've got a really good offense led by Ray J. Dennis, Jacoby Walker, and then their big man, Yves, I believe it's Yves Missy. But they've taken some lumps in conference play as expected. They have the third toughest strength of schedule in the nation. They've taken some lumps. They've lost a lot of overtime games. They've lost 3. They're 1-3 in overtime games this year. And they've done things like lose to Texas Tech, TCU at home, Texas on the road, who has taken a lot of losses this year, and just doesn't look as good as they have in years past. They lost to Michigan State earlier this year and didn't just lose. They got blown out by Michigan State, who was 18-13, and still somehow number 19 in the KenPom ratings, I guess because of their defense. But yeah, I don't necessarily know if I trust Baylor to make like a deep tournament run. They've got the talent. They don't have strong front court presences. It's kind of similar to Kentucky, actually. It's just I trust Kentucky's guards significantly more because of statistically how much better they are on paper. So, again, to recap, Oakland, San Diego State, Wisconsin, St. John's, Baylor are probably the teams I'm looking at. Maybe Seton Hall, but Shaheen Holloway versus John Calipari scares me. We'll see how that goes. Let me know what you think about the bracketology. Let me know what you think about the potential teams we could see, what scares you, what doesn't, in the comments below. Would you want to see St. John's? I'm sure some of you are going to talk about that. To wrap up the show here, I want to talk a little bit about Reed Sheppard. Where is he in the latest mock draft, 2024 NBA mock draft, according to The Ringer? We'll dive into that in just a second. Before I do that, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every single game of the tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a 1 seed, it is time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 if your first bet of $5 wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 wins. All you have to do is visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. Again, FanDuel.com/lockedon. Bet on college hoops to your heart's content over at FanDuel. All right, wrapping up the Tuesday edition of Locked On Kentucky. So we've talked about the bracketology. We've talked about where these teams stand in these potential draws for the Wildcats, who are currently sitting at a 3 seed per ESPN and various other outlets. Let's talk, to wrap this up here, about Reed Sheppard. Reed Sheppard, as of today, I think is one of the best guards in this year's draft, and I think the best shooter in this year's draft. SEC Freshman of the Year. What I did not expect from a major outlet like the Ringer is to have him so high in their latest projection. According to the Ringer's latest 2024 NBA mock draft, Reed Sheppard is projected to go first overall to the San Antonio Spurs. This is what the Ringer has to say about Sheppard and the Spurs. Victor Wembanyama is already emerging as one of the game's greatest players, and we're giving San Antonio the number 1 pick for our first edition of Mock Madness. With this selection, or their potential second lottery pick via the Raptors, the Spurs should add a shot-creating guard to optimize Wembanyama's offense. Sheppard stands out as a prime option because of his shooting prowess, playmaking feel, and defensive intensity, which was put on display once again in Kentucky's road win in Tennessee over the weekend. Is number 1 too early to take Sheppard, who measures just 6'3" and 187 pounds? He would be the shortest top pick since Kyrie Irving in 2011 and the lightest since Allen Iverson in 1996. But while Sheppard might be on the smaller side, I believe he's worthy, especially given the overall strength of the class and his potential fit with the Spurs, where his lack of size could be mitigated by an all-time defender protecting the paint. Together, Wembanyama and Sheppard could become one of the NBA's best duos. That is what the Ringer has to say about Sheppard. Kevin O'Connor, article author there at the Ringer, would encourage you to go check this out. NBAdraft.theringer.com/mockdraft is where you can check this out. Kentucky going over a couple of big-time prospects from France, Alex Sarr being one of them, Stephon Castle at UConn, who is UConn's current small forward, statistically the least efficient out of the starting five there, but I think definitely one of the players that has the highest upside on that team. Ron Holland of G League Ignite, Mataz Bozeles of G League Ignite. Hope I don't butcher these names here. Rob Dillingham going at number 8, by the way, to the Houston Rockets. I don't want to see Dillingham go to the Rockets. Go to a better team. Please put him on a better team. Isaiah Collier, USC. Dalton Connect going to the Lakers. Jared McCain, Duke, all here in the top 15, by the way. Jacoby Walter, who's going to go 16th to the Raptors, according to this. Hunter Salas, Kyle Filipowski, Devin Carter, Zach Edey, Johnny Furphy, Deron Holmes. Some really good players here, and yet Kentucky guard Reed Sheppard above all of them at number 1. Number 1. Can you believe it? I think Sheppard is a top 10 pick. I think he's probably going to be a top 5 pick. To put him as the best player in this year's draft class, I think I wouldn't argue with it. I think he's really, really good. If you can get a kid that shoots 50% from 3 and takes 2 to 3 outside shots a game, 2 to 4, I should say, and can defend, can distribute, has hops, would play alongside a guy like Wembanyama, yeah, I would take that. Absolutely, I would take that as the top overall pick. So let me know what you think. Should Reed Sheppard be the number 1 overall pick in next year's draft? Let me know. That's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. You can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On UK. You can follow me on Twitter at @LanceDawe_, and you can follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns, leave those in the YouTube comments below. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Have a great rest of your day, and God bless.